therapist, radio veteran, and of course, certified badass. No other than Miss Kelly Orchard.
Very nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Book 101, Miss Kelly. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Well, I'm Kelly Orchard. I'm an author, traveler, psychotherapist, and radio veteran. I'm second generation radio broadcaster. My dad was in radio before I was born. Born and raised in Los Angeles, California, which is the setting of my book Dead Air. Owned and operated radio stations with my dad for 17 years. Actually, it was a family business. My brothers worked there too, so I don't want to discount them. Then we transitioned into working as consultants for FCC compliance for radio and TV stations. It's a really boring job. I know people we used to be told that we're doing the Lord's work because radio and television stations have a license by the government and they have to do certain things to in order to maintain the license and the right to broadcast. And so my dad and I spent about 20 years inspecting radio and television stations, which is basically where the Dead Air, the day the music died story originated from, was doing all of those inspections, and especially in Los Angeles area because that's where the setting for the story is. So that's me. And in between all of that, I became a licensed psychotherapist. So that is
Yes.
my bread and butter. I work in mental health. So Dead Air is my debut novel, but I also have several other books that I have written primarily on the mental health aspect, personal and professional development. But I'm here to talk about Dead Air. But if anyone wanted to
Yes.
find me, you can find me on Amazon. They're all on Amazon. So
Yes, so Miss Kelly Orchard, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. The title Dead Air has a double meaning, referring to both silent radio waves and the death of music itself. What drew you to this specific chilling concept for a thriller?
well, you know, the original concept came with, the setting is Mount Wilson, which in Los Angeles is the major antenna farm for the majority of the radio and television stations in that region. And the idea came from complaints from when we would do these inspections. The engineers that were up there on the mountain would complain about lack of security. There's a lot of construction that was going on, a lot of people coming and going, and these are broadcast facilities, and there was barely any security at all for them. And it's actually a legal requirement that they have security. So that's where the story kind of came from. So the dialogue started happening. I would just ask these engineers, my inquisitive mind, my writer's mind, what would happen if somebody came up here and cut off all of the transmissions? Well, then we started going through the engineering aspect of it. And what I wanted to originally call the book was The Day the Music Died. But then I realized that reader might not understand that it's about dead air or about the radio business, but also I thought that I might come into trouble with who is it? It's not Cat Stevens, Don McLean for the song
Yes.
American Pie because he uses the day the music died. I thought it was trademarked. So I added dead air because that's exactly what happens is that terrorists take over the transmitters of 100 radio stations in five major markets. And in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and Dallas. And so their first thing they do is they just take the stations dead. Just there's nothing going on the radio. So that's where dead air came from. And then the day the music died is it takes place in just 24 hours. So it's a very fast paced thriller, kind of takes you through the whole motions about what's going on internally at the radio station. And so what happens is that all the news is covering this story about radio and the terrorist messages that are going on and back and forth and the battle that the stations are doing with the misinformation and the terrorist messages. Well, there's no music being played on the radio. So that's why it's the day the music died, because there was no music played on the radio that day that this was going on. So that's kind of the premise of the title. And it's a long way around, right? Yeah.
Yes. The idea of music as a weapon is terrifyingly unique. What was the initial spark for this plot?
Music isn't the weapon. It basically the music is taken off the air. So the initial interest in the plot was really demonstrating the power of radio and the power of messaging. That in this story, these transmitters are taken over by some nefarious people who start broadcasting a message of terror to instill fear into radio listeners. And that is a very very powerful tool, when you can tell people that they're in danger and they start to panic. And you can imagine what happened in your community if you're listening to something, even any kind of broadcast, and they're telling you, that we've planted bombs here, or there's going to be a terrorist attack there, or things like that. So that's pretty much where the premise came from, is using it as a tool, the power of suggestion, the power of somebody's lies could really cause a lot of damage.
In a world saturated with apocalypse stories, what did you feel a sonic attack narrative could explore the pandemic or nuclear war story could not?
Well, there is it's, I'm glad that you caught that. There is a connection to that, the War of the Worlds. Back in the 1930s, I think there was H.G. Wells had written a story about an alien attack, War of the Worlds, and a radio station in, I think it was Chicago, had done a live play of it. But when the audience listened to the broadcast, they thought it was really real, and it caused a lot of panic, that they were listening to the radio, but it was really it was a play. And so radio has been using that story for, well, since the 30s, for almost 100 years now, to demonstrate how powerful, the images, like theater of the mind, and how it can scare us. And I know that in a lot of these apocalyptic stories that can be written, is it real? Could it really happen? And I love this book because I talked to a lot of engineers, and my story is actually very relevant. They said that the scariest thing is that could actually really happen, because I wanted to make sure that this book was factual when it came to the engineering
Totally factual. Miss Kelly, are you there? Well, people, yes, Miss Kelly
yeah,
is here.
sorry.
There's a glitch. There's a glitch, Miss Kelly. So let's talk about on the world and the science. The science behind the attack feels frighteningly plausible. What kind of research did you do into acoustic, neurology, and sonic weaponry to build this terrifying scenario?
Well, I did a lot of research with, I grew up around broadcast engineers. My dad was one, and then doing all of the inspections, I always say I learned by osmosis. I just learned by listening, paying attention. I don't claim to be an engineer, but I certainly know a lot of the technology now. And so as I was writing the book, I was just like checking with other broadcasters, with other engineers in the radio industry, about what I was writing, to make sure that it was all accurate and true. So the research I did was, I did a little. There's some like tools that I have them use that I had to research. So there's drones in it, and there's a remote gun turret, and I didn't know anything about those, and so I researched what those could do, and then I actually went into Chat GTP and asked some questions with AI, and had a dialogue with what AI is like. Well, what might somebody use that for? How could that be modified, and things like that. So I expanded my level of research from talking to broadcast engineers to then having an idea sprout up, then allowing myself to search for articles and other information that actually I let AI help me locate them. And that was really helpful. I think that for my writing process, that really helped speed things up for me.
Truly, truly. Well, resourceful, Miss Kelly. Society collapses in every specific way through silence, fear, and the loss of unifying cultural forces. Why was this more interesting to you than more traditional violent collapse?
Well, I really wouldn't put myself in a category of writing a lot of conspiracy theories or thrillers like this. This story was really it just kind of evolved out of conversations over the years with people. You know, my dad and I, we worked together, and we'd go up to Mount Wilson, and we would talk about this, and the silence, and like you talk about the silence and the collapse, and all of that would be discussed by these engineers. And we'd come down, that we'd be driving down the mountain talking about, well, what would happen. And it was more about a lot of questions. If the radio goes silent, is anybody going to care? Not really. If nothing's going on, they're just going to find something else to go listen to, right? Nobody
Yes.
would care. And so I had to that's when I had to come back with, well, then they have to bring up something terrifying in order for it to make any kind of an impact. And that's usually what happens. Silence is no response at all. So when the stations just go dead, even the police and the FBI and everything else in the storyline, they don't take it too seriously. And even the audience is laughing about it and creating hashtags and social media, and it starts to trend, where's my radio station? And then all of a sudden, soon they come up with a terrorist message which starts terrifying the community. So it does have that apocalyptic kind of feel to it, but it's modern day happening now. And thankfully there's a resolution, because we just got to get these stations off the air. And that's how it goes.
Miss Kelly, let's talk about on the characters and their journey. Our
Okay.
protagonist is often a radio DJ or audio engineer, someone whose life is sound. Why is it essential for the main character to have the specific profession and relationship with audio? Miss Kelly?
Mhm.
Hello. Hello, Miss Kelly. Can
Hello.
you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, I can now.
So
You want
my
to start
last
talking about
question
the
is
radio?
yes. Let's talk
Yeah.
about the on the characters and the journey. Our protagonist is often a radio DJ or audio engineer, someone whose life is sound. Why was it essential for the main character to have the specific profession and relationship with audio?
Well, I honored the broadcast industry of radio engineers with this book, because that is the protagonist, the radio engineer. And that was just important because that's where the story evolved, was talking to engineers about their struggles. So that's why it was important. And honestly, I can say that there has never been a broadcast engineer as the protagonist in a novel. So the radio industry really embraced it, at least broadcast engineers. But then, of course, there's three other main characters in this story, and what I did was I just took the core of operations of a radio station. So you have the main character is the chief engineer, and then you have the market manager, who's the manager of all of the radio stations. Then you have the program director. He's the guy in charge of all of what goes on the radio in their market. And then you have a radio personality who gets elevated to kind of an anchor spot to do all of the reporting.
Interesting indeed, Miss Kelly. And how do the survivors communicate and build communities when the very act of speaking or making noise can be lethal?
Well, the whole story. I can't give that away because that's the end of the story, the book. you know,
Yes,
but
spoilers.
yeah, so I can't do that. That would be a spoiler alert. So I have to, but they do have to end up working with with legal matters and the military and whatnot, and figure out a way to get the broadcasts to stop. And that is ultimately what needed to happen, was that nothing's really happening except the fact that the radio listeners are terrified. And even though it's like, have you ever, it's like there's that saying about, you drive by a car accident, and you can't help but look at it as you drive by, because you're curious about what's going on. And so that's kind of the premise, the psychological premise in this story, is that people can't stop listening to the radio. They want to know what they're going to say next. And then it still terrifies them. So they're going back and forth from listening to the message to listening to the battle that's going on. So we're talking about battle of FM and AM stations. So
Yes. Miss Kelly, as an author, psychotherapist, and radio veteran, what are your short term and long term goals?
Well, my short term goals is I have another book coming out very soon, but it's another professional development book. But I do have several novels that I am also working on, but in a different genre, but still with a theme of radio. So I think that radio will always be in my stories, but they are not always going to be like dead air. Dead air, I think, is a maybe a once in a lifetime kind of story. I mean, I've been asked about a sequel, and the sequel's kind of stirring in my mind. That's me. I'm a creative. I can't help it. So long term, more novels. Short term, I have another book coming out called "Flipping the Format on Your Fear of Failure," and it goes through a whole program of flipping your mindset to more positive psychology.
Good luck to your goals, Miss
Thank
Kelly.
you.
Looking forward for more success. And
Thank
what
you.
will be your piece of advice for those people out there want to be like you?
Just keep going. If you're if the certified badass thing, what badass means is that if you've made mistakes, or you've had some troubles in your life, or you've been fired, or maybe you've been divorced, or maybe you've had some bad luck or financial struggles, but you're still standing, you're still showing up and watching a video like this, and you still want to write, or you want to read, or you want to do something creative, keep going, because that's what a badass does. So if you're already doing that, you are already a badass. And that's why I certify badasses. I just want to remind you that you are, because you're not giving up.
Yes, we are a badass people.
That's right.
Certified because we are not
Certified.
giving up.
That's right.
Totally, totally, totally agree with you, Miss Kelly, and we salute you for that advocacy. We are certified badass. And thank you for that advice. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
I'm sorry.
Can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Oh, book or books that influenced my journey. Oh gosh, you caught me on that. I like to follow Michael Heiser. Michael
Mm,
Heiser wrote a bunch of
yes.
books about the ancient languages of the Bible, and so I've been listening to his audiobooks. Yeah, so he talks about spirit world and angels, and he digs deep into the Bible and the ancient languages. Yeah.
Thank you for that recommended book, Miss Kelly. Do you see this story of yours, Dead Air, as a cautionary tale about technology, a celebration of music, or something else entirely?
Definitely a cautionary tale about technology. Yes, it has drones, AI, takeovers, hijacking, lack of security. It's definitely a cautionary tale.
And the concept feels incredibly visual. Has there been interest in adapting Dead Air for film or television?
There have been people who have reached out to me. It only was released in March, so I'm still looking at that. So I'm definitely interested in talking to people about that, and I've had a few people mention it. Yes. Yeah.
Miss Kelly, without the
Yeah.
spoilers, does the ending offers a sense of hope? Or is it more bleak commentary on the irreversible nature of this kind of loss? Without the spoilers, please, Miss
That is
Kelly.
turned upside down and switches from what it was in the beginning.
Yes. And Miss Kelly, were there any songs or piece of music you found yourself thinking about constantly while you're writing this book?
Um, no, but I'm glad you brought up the music part, because the very first sentence is basically a homage to my dad. Um, Engineers, they have the ability to give themselves an alert on their phone when the transmitter goes down and the station is off the air. And so I had this engineer do what my dad had done. And my dad, when the station would be off the air, he would have a problem with the transmitter, he would have it play the song "Help" from the Beatles. So
Mm.
it would sing "Help, I need somebody," and then we would all know that the radio station's in trouble and we need to get there to fix whatever's wrong. And so the first line in the book is that this engineer is woken up by the song "Help" being played on his phone, and he knows that there's a problem. So
Awesome, Miss Kelly Orchard. Thank you so much for sharing your debut novel to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your books?
yes, please do. You can find them on Amazon. They're all there. You look for me, Kelly Orchard. I have a whole author page, or you can go to my website at kellyorchard.com. Find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. I think I'm licensed to be badass on Instagram. So yeah.
Yes, 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 we are certified badass people. Yes, people, let's support Miss Kelly Orchard because if you support her, for sure, more and more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Miss Kelly, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
More to come, people. See you soon.